question because we had actually some talks before, obviously all of us. But I wanted to ask Judy what was her first encounter with Gibran, because Hadia, Loubna and Bouthaina came on the ship in '69, but Judy was actually born here, and so I think you should hear the story.
I'll be very quick, and if I cry, you turn it off, okay?
No censorship.
I was in Year 6 at St Michael's School at Meadowbank. I was a 6-year-old in Year 1, and our class was all asked to bring a book from home that was special to us for our class library. So of course I used to see my father, who died 3 years ago at the age of 104. I used to see him read Gibran all the time. And in fact he was at Gibran's funeral in Lebanon in 1931, yes. As a 20-year-old, he made the trek on his donkey and watched this man from New York being buried. But so I took my book to school, which I had bought in a $2 shop, which was St Vincent de Paul back then. We didn't have $2 shops back then. And because it had Arabic in it, I thought it was really precious. And I love that book, I still have it. I took it to school, and my teacher, God bless her, Sister Annunciata, said, "This is a beautiful book, Judy, but I don't think anybody else will think it's important." And little did she know that what she did then was make a decision for me about what was valued and what was not valued. And my stories as a young child never made it to the Gold Star Wall. And I remember my mother, who was also illiterate, Hadia, creating a Gold Star Wall at home, having no idea what the hell a Gold Star Wall was, and just making sure that everything I brought home from school she put up on that wall. And I'm grateful to her because she gave me a voice. Look, now I want to go to you because you have a voice.
Thank you, finally.
See what I have to put up with? Can you imagine these amazing 4 women trying to get one answer to one question without being told off? It was wonderful. Look, now you, I know one of my first encounters with you, I remember going home and thinking, I just didn't know women like this existed. And so I'm going to cry.
A tissue?
No, I told you that. But one of the first things that you allowed me to do was be a small part of that little journey of writing your book. And I remember the day that it was delivered. I was there for the birth. And
you put it on your
breast.
breast.
And I put it on my breast and we nurtured it. But can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that book had so many layers in it. And it's called Seducing Mr. McLean. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that?
Can I just say that my father always was very encouraging of us when we were little. And he used to make success really, really accessible. Like he would say, you just have to write one book and you will change the world. Look at Karl Marx, So I've written one book, but nothing has changed actually. Look, I think I've always loved writing, and I thought writing was very much an expression of love for me. I remember when I was about 6 or 7, I loved my grandma very much because she brought us up. Basically, my mom was a dressmaker in Lebanon, and she was always very busy with deadlines, for very sort of, for her women customers. But Grandma was there for us always, in the kitchen, making chips after school or squeezing, orange juice and making tomato juice for us, for vitamins and all that. Anyway, I loved my grandma, and I slept next to her most of my life in Lebanon. And I really wanted to preserve her, because she had very white hair. And I thought, she is old, and I need to do something, So I would ask her a lot about her life and her stories. She had a very hard life because it was during the Ottoman Empire, during the famine, and her brother died of famine. And her husband died of tetanus, whatever. So she would tell me all these stories, and I would immediately go and write them into a play. To preserve her, basically, because I knew that she, this was a very important part of her and of my expression and my attachment to her. So when we came here, and I finished with medicine, thank God, and I sort of thought it's so important to give a voice to the people that I love, to the people that have left Lebanon and have come here, and to write something about that journey and experience. And I really hardly ever came across any of these stories in the literature of Australia. So it made me feel, in a way, not part of this society, because I could not read about myself. So I really wanted to close the gap and give myself and people like me a voice with a Lebanese accent in English. So I decided to write, and I think it was very much an expression of love for my culture and for this country as well, and to close the gap between the other and, me and the other, or the other and me, whatever. Yeah.
And I'll never forget the first sentence in that book, Loubna. All of us who have done everything in our lives because our parents told us to, because it's what they wanted for us. And the first book of Seducing, the first line is, I'll never forget the day of my graduation.
Can I say it,
Oh, please.
please?
Oh, Jesus, I thought you were going to forget it.
If I am to start the story anyway, it should be at the time where my father, at the time of my graduation, it was my father's happiest day of his life.
Oh. So, Bouthaina, there's the legal, medical, creative writing side, and yours was always dance. I mean, some of the photos you've been seeing of the young person dancing there is Bouthaina. I think for you've worked in many amazing spaces, not only as a science teacher, but as a creative dance teacher, and you've taken that to fields with people with disabilities, people with autism, and really found different expressions of dance. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your expression and your journey?
Well, you can see how difficult it is to talk. So, as the youngest of 5 children, I had to find another means of expression. And for me, the words, the silence beyond the words was always very important. I always felt that there was something connecting all human beings that was beyond what you could hear physically. And I think that silence is really the connection, and I think Gibran speaks about that. But regarding dance, I found through dance that it went beyond the mind and expressed things I didn't know consciously. And I actually found that I could access aspects of myself through the dance that I didn't know existed, knowledge that I didn't know I had. And the other thing that I found through dance was an authentic self, particularly through authentic movement. And therefore I could see myself as not double, but one. Through dance, I learned dance therapy. And because, I guess this is possibly because I was a migrant and needed to find an identity that was connecting myself to my Lebanese family, but also connecting myself to the social, the Australian. And I wanted to integrate, I wanted to belong. So I had to find a self that could integrate into both. And that was very difficult. So it pushed me to find a sense of the universal self and the essence of myself. And I guess in working with people such as the elderly in hostels, often people who have lost their memories and are in contexts that are not their normal context, they're really out of context, I would attempt to connect with the essence that was always there, that was beyond all of that, and the same beingness that I was myself. So in the dance, in the movement, I would try to connect with that universal sense of self.
Bouthaina, one of the things that is amazing about your story and the way you've described that is anyone who's been looking at Gibran's work will know that all of the forms and figures he creates are always in motion, and they're always either entwined or engaged or connected to others. And I think what you've just described there is a really big part of that it engaged and it connected and it created connectedness. Yeah. There are so many questions still, but I know there are probably some things that you want to raise, and I'm conscious that we want to give the audience a chance to ask some questions. Yeah? So are you happy how did it go from there to there? Before I give it to Hadia to add, because I dare not ever say no to her, I just wanted to tell you, we've talked about sort of the really learned aspects and the books and the wonderful experiences. And I know I grew up on the stories where the three things that my grandmother brought with her on the ship were her jiran, the big jiran that they make gibi in, which weighs a ton. Her coffee pot, which she ended up making coffee for the whole ship by the end of the 3-month voyage. And the one thing that I think is a really beautiful story, and that is she brought her robi, the culture from the yogurt. And I can tell you, after 60 years, and I turned 63 days ago, that robi, the chain of that yogurt has never been broken. Wow. And this is the sort of stories that I think that all of your stories do. It may be a visual, it may be a musical, it may be a written form, but this creates chains that keep us connected. Yeah. And that robi in my fridge, if there's ever a fire in our apartment, I will take the photos and the yoga culture. Sorry, now you can have the mic back.
So I get my own.
I wanted to share the fact that although immigration is very traumatic because you're forever trying to recreate yourself, prove yourself, adapt, find a new identity, reinvent yourself, and so on, and it goes on and on and on. But there is something very exciting about immigration that I'd like to share with you. When we grew up in Lebanon, in a very strict non-school, if we were by the windows, our school was at the corner of 2 main streets. So if we, as students, the girls, it was a girls' school, look down from the window down the street, the head nun will come and say, "Get off that window, you street girls, what are you trying to do?" So you can imagine we were so deprived from encounters with the opposite sex. So when I read about Australia, we had 2 wonderful books. One book showed the beautiful birds, the parakeets, the rosellas, kookaburras in colors, so we were very excited to see them. But another book had these amazing looking Anglo boys on the beach, really sun-tanned, surfing. So we were very excited, coming to Australia to meet them. Excited to the extent that when we had to fill in the immigration form, when we landed in Australia, and they, one of us had to complete them, and they asked us, about, your date of birth, where you came from, and then your sex. I said, what a liberated country. Sex. So you can imagine what we wrote.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Virgin.
Oh no! Did you put virgin on there? Oh if you put anything else, you wouldn't have made it to Australia. Well, look, let me just a final comment, not a final, but a comment before we actually are asked for some questions, yeah?